Hey class, welcome to week 7. We are basically halfway through the semester, which is pretty cool. I guess at the middle of this week we'll officially be halfway through. So good job making it through half of the semester. You guys are all doing really great. So I'm going to take a little time since the video last week was not working super great to just kind of respond to the last 2 weeks and then let you know what's coming up, okay? So let's quickly review your responses to dialect and those readings. I was really excited to read all of your forum posts. They're all graded now, just so you know. I felt like generally everyone was pretty surprised to be reading something like that in the English class. Most people really kind of agreed, and or maybe beyond, maybe the general consensus was just like, oh, this was really eye-opening. I've never thought of this before. And maybe you hadn't quite reached a level of like agreement or disagreement. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I noticed in your forums to kind of clarify. So some of you said like, I agree with some of it and some not, but I did want to point out like, the readings are in general saying the same points, but in different ways, right? So I think bad ideas about writing, sometimes they start with kind of a satirical point where they point out something that is a bad idea or something that they don't agree with, and they make a case against that. So in general, that's what those articles were doing, right? They were saying things that typically are common in the world of academia or grammar or education. And they were kind of pointing out the flaws with those reasonings. So I just want to point that out if you were confused. But in general, the point of all of them is that we should value the way that everyone speaks a language. And one of you, I think, did point out in your posts that as well, we in America are not speaking proper English, right? Because we moved here from Britain and incorporated slang of our own. And then when people in America got financial power, that is when that became recognized as more elite, more intelligent, if you will. So that is something to think about as well, that languages just shift over time naturally. They incorporate slang, and when there are big geographic movements of people, languages inevitably change. Let's see. So, also, just to think about with those readings, a key point is just that grammar in general is really interwoven into class and systems of race and supremacy, right? Like grammar is some rules that were created by some really old white men who felt like their way of talking was kind of the most smart way. And in that time, right, though there was only a small group of people going to school and whatnot. And so this also just exposes some history for us that bilingual speakers, people who speak English as a second language, or African Americans, historically have been treated really bad in schools, right? So there are several examples of this. Up until even in the 80s, African American children in schools were put into lower classes, or there's accounts, had read an article recently of an account where like a girl talks about how she was just like sat in the corner as a kid with a crown because her English wasn't good enough, so she was told she wasn't smart enough to learn or participate with the class, right? Native Americans are another really important example of this, especially where we are. We did not acknowledge other languages as being intelligent or valid forms of speaking or thinking at all, right? So we essentially put those people into lower classes and said that they weren't as smart. So that's kind of something that these readings are also exposing, is just kind of this like lack in our education system historically that we have had, which places one way of speaking as the most intelligent way. And that's what we really want to get away from. And think about there are different ways to communicate. And this really goes into this past week's readings and this next week's readings, right, is because we're thinking about genre. And we're also thinking about the way that, or one of the takeaways, I guess, is that really great writers don't always write in the same way. They don't write in the same dialect. They don't use the same type of languages. We're going to be reading an article this week that is written by a really intelligent academic who has published lots of things, and she's going to be switching between Spanish and English in her article. We're reading poems, right? Last week we read All God's Children Had Wings, and these things where they are beautiful pieces, right? They are well written, and the dialect that they're written in only serves their purpose more. It doesn't make them less than or not intelligent, right? So that was like another key point. That's why we read it right before this. And dialect within genre is very purposeful and meaningful, if that makes sense. So feel free to email me or chat. I know actually some of you did reach out and say that you really enjoyed those week's readings. It's a little bit of a bummer that we don't get to have like a class discussion about them, but I did really enjoy reading your discussion and I tried to engage a little bit. So another thing that I wanted to say about the discussion forums in general, not just the dialect ones, but when you are writing in your discussion forum, please, if you say, I disagreed with some of this, but agreed with some of it, I really want to know what you disagreed with and what you agreed with, right? I want you to kind of engage with the material. And so that's just really vague. Don't leave me like hanging like that, like I want to know what you're thinking about it. So make sure that if you're going to say that you disagreed with some things that were in a reading, I want you to really specifically point out what that is to me. And I want you to like critically examine what you're thinking about it. You're welcome to disagree with the readings, right? That is great. But I want you to be able to articulate what it is that you disagree with and why. So I might take off points if you say you agree or you disagree, but you don't include why for either one of those things. Right? To me, it's more important that you're thinking through what you are sometimes, sorry. It's more important to me that you're thinking through why you think what you think about the reading and kind of making that case than it is that you liked it or didn't like it or agreed or disagreed. I want you to think critically about it. Another thing about the forums from that week or just in general feedback, when I ask you to give feedback to one another, I really am not looking for you to only point out the positives or to just say, I really enjoyed this or this was really good. And we will get more into feedback in a couple weeks when we are like writing bigger papers, but just make sure that you are giving them something to improve upon, right? So one good way to practice this in the meantime would just be to think about giving one positive and one negative. And in that negative, include what they can do better, right? So you're doing this really well. Here's something that could be better, and this is how you could change it, or this is how you could improve this section of the writing. There is always something that can be better, no matter how small it is, right? Every professional writer gets feedback like that and revision tips. So I know that all of you have things that you can improve upon. So just kind of confidently, you don't have to be right. I don't think too much about that because it's also your job as a writer to evaluate whether or not you actually want to make those changes, right? So don't get nervous or don't doubt yourself and think like, I'm not really sure if that's right or not. You can even say that. Like at first, this is my first thought, but I'm not positive, but that's my feedback. That's fine. But at least you're giving the writer something to consider, right? That's what I want. I don't want you just to agree with the writer. Okay, so that's kind of all. So last week, I loved how interested you guys were in some of the readings. We're not all the way through the week yet, so I haven't read all of your posts. But so far, I have really enjoyed your responses to All God's Children Had Wings. That seems to be one that people really, really love. I love that some of you took time to think about the concepts within it, about flying away. And Travis, I know you researched that, which is kind of cool. It is in a lot, that idea, that term, and that concept is in a lot of early Black literature, African, like in the U.S. So that's just something cool to think about. There are a lot of themes and motifs that are in early genres. Also, I just wanted to point out that there is no author. So I know we don't have a for sure author of that piece. So some of you had, I could tell, because there was like, is it a he? Is it a she? How do I refer to this author? We don't really know who wrote it because it was kind of an oral folklore before it was anything else. It was just orally passed down. The first time it was written was quite a bit later, so we don't actually know who the original author is. So let's see what else. So now we are going to move into poetry, which I'm really excited about. I think that in the beginning of our class, some of you expressed being a little nervous about poetry or not sure if you're going to like it. One of the poems is pretty long. I'll just try to get through most of it. There is an audio link, so you can just listen to it if you want and try to notice some of the things that are happening in the poem, right? Like, it is super complex, it is long, and it is kind of hard to understand at parts. But one thing to be thinking about with all of these poems, beyond whether you like or dislike it, although that is great, you can take time to interpret it within yourself and to think about what it means to you and what you like about it. But I also really want you to think critically about them. I want you to think about, and I don't mean, when I say that, I don't mean that I want you to criticize them. What I mean is that I want you to take time to think about what the authors are doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing, and if it's working or if it's not, or what parts are working and what parts are not for you, and why do you think they chose this way, right? And that's going to be really important to think about as we move on, because you're going to be moving next week, and then, well, I think we're starting on it at the end of next week, and then we'll start building into our genre analysis paper. And that's essentially what the entire paper is going to be doing. You're going to be picking one of these readings that we have read as a class during these 3 weeks of genre, and you're going to write an entire paper that analyzes what forms of rhetoric they're using. Like, why are they writing in that genre? How are they writing in that genre? And then you're going to talk about why that's working, why that helps to make the author's point. So feel free to kind of compare them to last week. Like, why do you think a story format works for something, but some of these other genres work for something else, right? So, like, you're going to read Letter to Birmingham Jail. How does that communicate something differently than Still I Rise by Maya Angelou or All God's Children Have Wings? How do those compare? Are they going to different audiences? Just be thinking about that. Think about why one genre is chosen over another and what the author is accomplishing when they do that. And be thinking about what the most interesting readings are to you, because you are going to be choosing one. So I would kind of go ahead and have in the back of your mind, have your wheels turning about what pieces are really sticking out to you, which ones you would like to research more. For those of you that really liked All God's Children Had Wings, you could write about the concept of flying away in your genre analysis, and that would be a really cool paper. So just some thoughts about that, right? Like, you could be thinking about why Letter to Birmingham Jail is written in an epistolary form. You could write about, right now, don't think about the writing part, I guess. Just think about what's interesting. If you have questions that come up as you're reading it, like, why does Hal not have any punctuation? Why does it have these really long run-on sentences? Maybe that's really interesting to you, and you want to think about why that is, and you want to research it a little bit. Like, that is something to kind of just keep on the back burner, because those ideas will help you as you start brainstorming for paper topics. Other than that, I'm really excited because genre is like what I've been most excited about working with you guys in this class. So I love all of these readings. They're some of my favorite things. But feel free to reach out to me. I would love to know what you're thinking about the readings, or if you already have some ideas that you're thinking about for the upcoming paper, you can feel free to send them my way, write about it in the professor forum, or email me, or whatever. But I hope you enjoy the poems this week, and I hope that they inspire you to think about genre and to think about um, writing in general.